So from there, I know we all have our own experiences, and I'm no expert. I'm just trying to share my experience. I'm hoping that I can share a bit of education and understanding of what I've been through, what I know some of my friends have been through. And at the end of this, I hope I can just highlight the importance for if you're struggling with mental health, to talk to someone. I know at Visagio, there's definitely opportunity for that. And I know in our own lives, there's people around us, and sometimes it may seem like they're not too invested in us, but I think what I really realized over the past few years is that there's truly people who care, whether that be mental health professionals, family, friends, and the people I'm lucky to work with, which is you guys. So talking to someone as a friend, to someone reaching out to someone who may be struggling with mental health, as well as if you are suffering from mental health, it's the hardest step by far for me was talking to people, and especially as I talked more and more about it, it became harder and harder to admit the truth of it. So my journey so far kind of started. I mean, I've struggled with mental health for a few years now. I knew when I was about year 11 that I wasn't quite feeling myself. I wasn't the same person I was. I think it especially started that I think for each of us, there's different things which contribute to who we are and where we are. For me, there are quite a few things in my background. I think especially having immigrated from Zimbabwe to Australia, I think for a lot of us, we can identify with that immigration being quite a daunting and new challenge for us. In 2013, I immigrated. In 2014, I kind of realized I wasn't the same. I wasn't as happy as I used to be. I wasn't. I just didn't feel myself. Another symptom, I guess, or something I noticed was that I was continuously tired. I was always complaining about being tired, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It wasn't to do with anything in particular. I did seek help, so I was lucky enough that my parents could tell that I was always complaining about being tired, and I think I also saw it. I did see the school counselor when I was in year 11. Honestly, that didn't do much help for me. I think throughout the years, talk therapy wasn't something I was too big on. I definitely gave it a shot. I definitely gave it its opportunity, and I think in year 11, it just didn't click for me. I didn't get that much out of it, and I wasn't able to solve the root cause. So a lot of the counseling I sought at that time was always superficial. I felt it was always just, what happened this week, or it wasn't getting to the root of the issue. In 2015, I did see a GP just regarding this again, because I asked for medications and I asked to be referred to a psychologist. That didn't do much help either. And the medications, again, from my personal experience, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but from my experience, I was on the medications for 2 weeks. And the truth is that I had a lot of people in my ear saying, oh, there was those who said, oh, you should be on medications. There were those who said, you shouldn't be on medications. It's destroying your body. It was a really confusing time. And after 2 weeks, I just stopped the medications, and I didn't give them the proper chance that they needed, even if it was a low dosage. So I think I'd already had, I don't think I was necessarily depressed in the time in those 5 years. I think I definitely had, the idea of depression was definitely on my radar. So it wasn't as if I was trying to shut it down. I think I did have depressive episodes within there. So I did notice when I started uni that every 6 months, and I mean, someone could look at that and say maybe it was each time around exam time, but coincidentally it was often around exam times. I'd have a depressive episode where it would often last 3 to 7 days, where it would be just extreme depression. And to me, that didn't look like depression. I would say, okay, I've had, every 6 months, and this lasted for about 2-3 years between 2016 to 2019, I would have 3 to 7 days, just a one-off thing, where I would be extremely down and desolate, where I just wasn't in a good headspace at all. I would be in my room. I'd barely eat for 3 to 7 days. I wouldn't want to do anything. I wouldn't want to talk to anyone. I'd be completely on my own. And when I was living alone, that was easy. When I was with my family, I had to push them away. So that's what it looked like for me from 2014 to 2019. I'm coming into 2019 last year. I noticed I was physically fatigued, especially in February. And I went to the GP about that again. So and I presented to a new doctor and I said, look, I woke up one morning and it felt like I've done a lot of sport or running, and after a game of sport you feel really tired. It was different to that. I was like extremely tired. I woke up in the morning, I didn't want to do anything. It felt like I'd been hit by a car or something. Like, honestly, um, I felt something was completely wrong with me. Maybe I was deficient in something. So I went to the doctor, I presented, I said, look, I'm, I'm sick from work today because I'm completely and utterly exhausted. Something's definitely wrong with me. Like, I barely have the energy to drive. I'm sure there's some deficiency somewhere. Could you do some blood tests? Do you know what's wrong with me? And, the doctor was happy to do the blood test, but he also floated the idea of a psychologist. And to me, I knew mental health and depression was something that I was struggling with. But I think, to me, I was like, there's no way this can be mental health. Like, it's got to be physical. It's got to be some form of deficiency. Um, and he did the blood test, and the blood test, of course, came back, everything's fine. And I think I started seeing a psychologist fortnightly. So that's through the Medicare mental health care plan, which I'll explain a bit more later. But I think what brought me to that point was a bit of burnout to an extent. I think I'd been taking on a bit too much. I'd had uni, I'd had work. I was trying to do well in those, but also what was a big thing for me in 2019 was the relationships with my family and those around me. I was in a pretty unhealthy relationship, to be honest, with a girlfriend at the time. I think there were a lot of things I was trying to focus on and give attention to, which just really were draining me. And I think also um, I felt I was failing in a lot of those areas in terms of work, in terms of uni, in terms of the relationships. Um, Adding to that, I'd stopped a lot of the routines which had kept me floating for the past 5 years, especially to do with sport. So I quit my soccer club because I just figured, I need to study at night. And I mean, as silly as that sounds now, but at the time that was my logic. And I think that really didn't set me up well. Um, that really spiraled pretty badly until April 2019, where the depressive episodes, I started having pretty bad depressive episodes, where it would be about 3 days. And these would be every single week, where they would last about 3 days. And what would start as, I feel like a failure. On day one, it would be, I feel like a failure. I feel like I'm useless. And it would start to spiral where I just didn't want to do anything. And often this would be on the weekend. Day two would be just the whole day in bed. I just couldn't get myself out. And even if I went for a walk, or, people suggest you go for a walk, go play some sport, socialize with some friends, go have some good food, those kind of things. And it really nothing really happened for me. And the day three of the depressive episode, the third day, would often be the one where it's completely hopeless. It's, I've honestly tried so hard with my mental health. I've tried talking to people. I've tried this. I've tried talk therapies. I felt like I'd tried medication. And I think what's also important to note in these depressive episodes is that it's a completely different logic. It's completely illogical when you're in them. For me, I still don't understand them. At the time, I definitely didn't understand them. It felt like, I can't quite describe them. And on day three, it became suicidal. And each week it was getting worse and worse where, I think suicidal ideation, I'm not going to say it's normal, but I think it's rare for someone who hasn't thought of the idea of suicide before. But I think at this depressive episode, it became more than ideation. It kind of became, it got to the planning stage, if I'm brutally honest. And for me, that was extremely hard. That was extremely scary because when I'd come out of those depressive episodes, when, I'd work myself into such a tired fit. After those 3 days, I'd come down out of it. I'd come back into a more rational state. And it would be, how on earth could I have done that? How on earth could I have gone out with such intentions? How on earth could I even think of doing that to my family? So it was a very confusing, very confronting time. I wasn't honest and upfront with my psychologist at the time about it. So I was still seeing my psychologist fortnightly about it. And my friends weren't very aware of it. But I think my friends and family, luckily they were in my life, could kind of see that, you know, it's not normal Stephen coming home at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's not normal that he's so tired. There's definitely he's not himself. It's definitely, you know, I would be alone for 3 days. I would cut off friends for a week or so, because I just needed that distance. I needed that space where I could just be myself. So that kind of culminated into about over the course of the next few months. In August 2019, I saw the GP again. I asked to be put on medication. That was thanks to I'd confided in a close friend, and I'll tackle that later on, being a carer for someone or being there for someone. But that was extremely tough for them. But I confided it to a close friend. They recommended and really strongly encouraged me to seek medication because I was pretty opposed to it. I don't like the idea of not knowing what's going into my body, and I didn't really believe in it. Again, with these depressive episodes, I just felt like I tried everything, that nothing was working. But it came to a point, August, tried medication. I was on a low dosage, what I now know as a low dosage of a pretty mild antidepressant. And 2 months on that didn't really make a difference. And in October 2019, again, that close friend, I was lucky that I was pushed to actually confide in my doctor and psychologist, because I think that's a huge step to make. For me, that was a really scary step to make, because in Australia, we have the Mental Health Care Act, which is for the benefit of those who suffer from mental illness, which is the power to hospitalize you. And I didn't want to confide that to someone in power, so that I didn't want someone to have that power over me. But I think because I still felt like I still had control over it. I still wanted to be the decision maker over my life. I still felt like in those depressive episodes, again, this is like a completely different operating system, but in that depressive episode, it was still kind of, the rational Stephen is a lie. There is no hope. There is nothing that will make you better. They'll lock you up and you won't get better, and who knows what will happen to you. But I mean, thanks to being pushed by a friend, and I guess there's also credit given to yourself for taking that step, which is a huge leap of faith, to get those words out to the doctor and say, hey, look, I have gone out with suicidal intentions, where it was very close, very intense moments. And I think, and once I had that discussion with the doctor, he immediately referred me to a psychiatrist. That psychiatrist immediately put me on a pretty intensive antidepressants. This is the first week of October. But even after that week, even after this week of opening up to the doctor, opening up to the psychiatrist, being put on these tougher medications, I had another depressive episode. And luckily, my friend confided in my family, my parents. And when I had this depressive episode, they called 000. On me, the ambulance and police came, and I was voluntarily taken to Joondalup Mental Health Hospital, or Joondalup Hospital initially. I was processed on a Friday evening, early mornings, in the early hours, about 2 or 3 a.m. on Saturday morning. I was assessed by a psychiatrist, and it was suggested that I be admitted to Joondalup Mental Health units to better take care of my condition. In that meantime, not everyone gets admitted to Joondalup Mental Health unit, but if you ever find yourself needing to go to hospital, there is dedicated what they call the MOA, which is the Mental Health Observation Area. So you have a triage ward for those who have physical injuries, and you have a triage ward for those who have mental illnesses. So whilst I was waiting to be admitted to the mental health unit on the Monday, I was put in mental health observation, the observation area. And whenever you present to a hospital, there's the emergency room, again, the emergency room for the physical patients and for the physical injuries, and there's an emergency room for the mental illness, where they put me in a bed. There was a nurse who would check up on me, and you're taken care of from that point on. The first days in the hospital or in the mental health unit were some of the scariest. This whole ordeal was this mental health journey was by far the the scariest point of my life. If I was to explain it to someone, I definitely, at the time, I would often say, it feels like someone's trying to kill me. And then I realize that person's myself. And I don't really understand why, because of a lot of things. But I think the mental health unit was also, these ideas I have of mental health units, you've got to be crazy. That people are really sick. Am I going to get hurt? Is there someone who's going to have a psychotic break? It was a bit reassuring to know when I first arrived there, anyone who is a danger to someone else is not put on that mental health unit. They're put in a separate unit under a bit more scrutiny for the safety of themselves and others. But I was in this one, which was non-violent, to put it frankly. But it was still scary, because even though I was there voluntarily, even though I'd agreed to be there, I kind of knew that the nurses and the doctors had the power to force me to be there. For the first few days, I didn't know what was happening, so it was a prison in the way, because I couldn't leave. I didn't feel I could leave. But it did return to a bit of normalcy later in the week when my parents were able to visit. They were able to give me my phone and clothes and that kind of thing. But it was definitely a place I needed to be in, especially when, a week later that depressive episode would come again. I was definitely in a safe space. I was definitely in a place where I had a room, I had food, I didn't need to worry about anything. I could just have a bad day and not worry about whatever my irrational brain would take me. So I definitely needed to be in that unit, to be honest. And I was lucky I was there. And the nurses are amazing. And I know a lot of people would say that, but I think, really selfless, caring people I've met in there. And also the community aspect of it. And I also learned a lot about other people's and other mental illnesses. And I saw that the mental illness didn't have any discrimination. There were people there who were younger than me. There were people there much older than me. There were people there who, there was a guy who had a pretty major construction business, pretty successful people, you'd think. But then also people from pretty much all walks of life, which was interesting to see. And I learned, different mental health illnesses as well, from ADHD to anxiety to bipolar to depression, such as myself. People who were there because they had a spiral when they lost their job, or people who are there who are just successful and, they have their own reasons. But I guess there was a sense of community that, we're all stick together in a way. So in hospital, I was lucky. So during the past 5 years, the past 5 years, when I say talk therapy didn't really work for me, I saw about 4 or 5 psychologists and counselors in that time. None really clicked or worked for me. And I think the biggest problem for me was that I felt I needed to know what was wrong with me, to be able to then Google, psychologist, and then plus whatever keyword it was, psychologist plus depression or psychologist plus anxiety or whatever it was. And it didn't really work for me, and I didn't really know where to start. And that was always confusing for me and hard for me to seek help that way. But when I got to the hospital and I talked to a psychiatrist, luckily I was put with a really great psychiatrist who I still see today. And she said, actually, you're not supposed to know what's wrong with you. That's for the mental health professionals to diagnose and to help you with. A proper psychologist and a professional psychologist will assess you in some of your first appointments and then make a decision whether you should be referred or not. In my personal opinion, I think a lot of the psychologists I saw should have referred me. I'm not really going to comment on that too much, because that's, I guess, a professional thing. But I think I now think that if you see a proper psychologist, the expectation is not on you to know what's wrong with you, that for them to know what's wrong with you and for them to recommend a best course of treatment, and whether they would be able to provide that treatment to you or not. Because not every psychologist specializes in the area you or your friend or your family member may need. So from there, she decided that Schema Therapy would be one of the ways to go. And I was referred to a psychologist she recommended. She also gave me a range of other psychologists. As that psychologist, after our initial meeting with the psychologist, I really, really clicked with him. But he also did his professional duty, in that he said, I believe this schema therapy is the way for you. Here's a list of other people I'd recommend, but I do believe I could help you with this. And I definitely, for the first time, I felt properly understood by someone in the mental health profession. And perhaps that's because I'd gotten to the really serious end of the spectrum, and that I'd actually, before I'd been dealing with counselors and psychologists who may be dealing with small issues, but now I'd been dealing with people who work in a hospital, a clinical psychologist who can deal and handle depression. And I think when it comes to schema therapy, which is a part of psychology I don't really understand, to be honest, but what I do understand is when my psychologist explained it to me as there's two main focus areas we'll be working on in our treatment plan. The first one for me is agency, and that means just getting a better idea of who I am, what I want, what my values are, those kind of things. Being the person I am and bringing that person to work, to my studies, to my relationships, and also scope. So the idea of refining my scope so that it's, I don't want to, I cannot conquer everything. But a problem with me is that I'm a perfectionist in many areas, and I want to be perfect in work. I want to get perfect marks at university, and I want to have a perfect relationship with my family and my friends, but I can't. So it's about readjusting those energies correctly. And what was also helpful with that psychologist is going through the cycle of my depressive episodes. And I think it is good to visualize in that sense. And I visualize it here on the presentation, and that it was almost 4 stages for me. It was the rejection and disconnect. So if I felt, sometimes my friends would say, oh, Stephen, you're not spending enough time with us. Or it would be my family or my parents saying, Stephen, you're not spending enough time with us. Or it would be, I felt like I was not doing, I felt rejected by them in many ways, but it could have also been disconnect in others. And that led to the perfection, or that filled in with the perfection of I need a perfect relationship, or I need to be perfect at uni, or I need to be perfect at work. And undoubtedly, or almost obviously, I would fail in that. So I felt like I was a failure of a friend. I felt like I was a failure of a son. I felt like I was failing at work, and I felt like I was failing at uni. I wasn't measuring up to the perfection and the standards I'd set for myself. And that is when it dropped into that final hopeless and dark place of hopelessness, where I kept trying to mend the relationship with my family to get it to where I wanted to be. I kept trying to mend the friendship with my friends, to work on that, and I'd undoubtedly fail. And then I'd fall into a pit of hopelessness, and the cycle just kept going and going until it got to a deeply hopeless state. And I think visualizing that was good, so I could kind of stop myself in that cycle. Is this rejection I'm feeling with my friends? Or is this just this, are they rejecting me? Or is it perhaps more of a disconnect, they're not responding to my messages. That's not necessarily them rejecting me. Perhaps it's just a disconnect. Maybe they're just busy, small things like that. I think it also, the perfection, it doesn't need to be perfect. The failure, what looks like failure may not necessarily be failure. And hopeless, whether it is hopeless or whether there is still a chance. A bit of homework that helped me from my psychologist was, and especially in the sense of agency and getting a sense of who I am, was journaling. And that journaling everyday thoughts, but also at the end of sessions, you'd often give me a task to do. And some of them, for example, would be until the next session, go and list down what you want out of life. So for me, I remember going through that, and I had a long list of all the things I wanted in every area of my life. I wanted to have a job where I felt that work I was doing had some form of impact, that it wasn't just a mundane and routine job. I wanted to enjoy the place I worked. I wanted to enjoy talking to the people I worked with, and enjoy making jokes and having a laugh with them. And and the relationships with my friends and family, I wanted to be respected by my parents. I wanted to also show my parents love. I wanted to feel loved. What I wanted out of romantic relationships, how I want to feel respected, or how I want to feel valued, and those kind of wants. And I think writing it down gave me a clear idea, and actually thinking about it for often would it be hours at a time, and writing those ideas down really helped me. Another one in agency is in knowing yourself is that I'm definitely someone who focuses on the negatives. And I don't often pay much attention to my victories. I don't celebrate the victories. I often will do a very thorough analysis on the times I failed. But when I have a victory, I just, okay, I did well then. Let's move on. The next stage needs to be done. But I think as modelers, that's a very flawed model. If you're only putting in inputs which are failures, you also need to input into the model your victories. You also got to know what your positives are. You can't just focus on the negatives. And, my psychologist noted that. He recommended I go and have a list of my victories, but also for the times where I felt down and I felt like a failure and I felt useless, that there's a list there I can quickly look at, I can quickly reference, honestly, and just say, look, there is something I have done. There is stuff, and that also applies to the values and qualities. What I value in myself, or what values I have and what qualities I have. And also reaching out to friends and family to get their feedback, because, I only know myself so well. There may be things that other people have noticed or appreciate about me that I don't really know. So with all that, I thought I'd quickly share what I found, and this is called, when it comes to reaching out, and this is called the algae model. It's I wasn't able to do the mental health first aid course, as that was unfortunately cancelled due to coronavirus, but I have quite a few friends who've done it, including my brother. And I think this framework, the algae framework, when I saw it, which is done by the mental health first aid course, was one that what I found was quite succinct and quite useful, and what I saw worked pretty well. So the first one is assess the risk of harm. So when you're reaching out to someone and you want to be there for a friend or family member, assess the risk of harm to themselves and to others. And if you need to, then you need to call a professional, and whether that be 000, then it's 000. Once you have assessed their risk of harm, the next part is listening and almost acknowledging, and just listening in a non-judgmental way. So being able to hear them out, being able to just acknowledge their experiences. And you don't really need to fix it either. You can just listen and lend an ear to them. And I think that has value of its own. The next one is give reassurance and support. So for me, during my journey, those who gave me hope, who gave me reassurance, who gave me support, really did help me. They also encouraged me. The next E is encourage, and this has the benefits of professional help. So they also encouraged me to seek help, not only with psychologists, but also with medication. That was helpful. I don't know if I didn't really mention in my journey earlier, but I think when I came to hospital, they continued me on my medication. I'll just quickly touch on that on the medication part, is that I was pretty skeptical of medication, but after 6 weeks, the medication really did kick in for me. And the way I would describe medication is that the medication kind of reset me each day. So if I had a bad day with the specific medication I was on, which was an antidepressant, I felt like at the end of the day, before the antidepressants, one bad day would lead into another bad day, and it would lead to another bad day. But with the medications, it almost pushes that reset button when I go to sleep. So I wake up, and it may have been a bad day the day before, but I feel like I'm just a little bit higher and a bit happier in the morning, a bit higher on the happiness scale, if that makes sense. I think that definitely helped me. It is not without side effects. I definitely am frustrated by the side effects, and some of them include physical exercise. It's going for a run is just pretty not fun at all. Like one of the symptoms of withdrawals of this specific medication is that if you don't take it for about 48 hours, you start feeling like very lightheaded, very faint. And I've forgotten to take it before, and I felt that. But you also feel like almost electric shocks going through your system. And sometimes when I run, I feel those side effects or those withdrawal symptoms. So just doing basic exercise is frustrating. And whilst I'm coming off that medication now, because I'm definitely in a better place than what I was, the medication 100% helped, and I would take those side effects any day over the pit that I was in before. So that's just quickly on the medications, which I kind of forgot to mention. Just continuing on the reaching out. With the reaching out, what's also important is the idea of boundaries, is setting your own boundaries. And I'll touch on that a bit later. Again, also when reaching out, you have to acknowledge that you have a limited understanding of what that person's going through. I myself have struggled with depression. And if I'm talking to someone else who's struggling with depression or any other mental illness, I honestly have no idea what they're going through. I think that's important to keep in the back of your mind, is that you can't judge them. It's not only that you can't judge them, but it's really hard to understand. When I was depressed, I didn't feel like anyone understood me, and that was very hard. But also when I now talk to people who are depressed, I don't pretend to understand what they're going through, because what they're going through is completely different to the depression I went through. And at the end of the day, remember that you're not a mental health professional. There's only so much you can do, only so much you can help with in certain areas. But that can also be a positive in some ways, in that you can give them a reassurance and support and understanding and listening and time that a mental health professional perhaps can't. What reaching out may look like. So this is just an example I saw when I was in hospital. And I mean, this is also a framework that comes from the mental health first aid course, but as I saw it in practice in hospital so many times. And when I saw it on the mental health first aid course, I was like, yep, these are examples that I exactly see quite a bit. And the first question is, are you in a position to help? And when I was in the mental health hospital, there were times where I didn't have the emotional energy to help. I knew that I was down on my own. I knew I could barely take care of myself, let alone someone else. I didn't have that emotional energy to give. But there were other times where someone would be going through a situation like a panic attack, and I honestly didn't know what to do. Luckily, for those of us who are sitting around, there were other few patients who actually, had an idea or a bit of awareness and a bit of education, a bit of understanding, and they stepped in, and it felt to me, it looked like they were so natural. I was like, how on earth did you know how to do that? And often what they'll do is they first asked if they needed help, or if they wanted help. And they'll try a few other things. Some of the things they tried would be breathing exercises, offering water. That's something that may sound strange, but I think it's that physical connectedness that helps them. Talking it out, sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they want to talk, sometimes they don't. Do they need space? Do they want to be alone, or do they want to just talk to you? Are there too many people around them? Suggesting going for a walk, connecting with the outside, just being in nature, fresh air, honestly makes a lot of difference. And whether you can call a friend or family. So these are all things I saw, and I definitely saw someone I remember very vividly someone having a panic attack in hospital. I remember feeling very helpless because I wanted to help this person, comfort them. And luckily someone came along and did exactly this. And they just went out for a walk, they had some water, and it just calmed them down and gave them a bit of respite from what they were going through. So to summarize some of the lessons I learned and some analogies, I think one of them is learning to fly. I liken this to learning to fly in the sense that with this mental health, what was really hard is that I feel like a bird in a nest. And when a bird in a nest jumps out for the first time, it probably doesn't know how to fly, and it probably just falls down to the ground. And I felt like a bird who would just keep falling to the ground because I didn't know how to fly. And then, people would say, oh, Stephen, you've got to try again, or you've got to keep on trying. And I would say, you don't know how hard it is to climb back up that tree, to get back to that branch, to get back to that nest, and then jump off again and think you're going to fail and fall again. That was really hard for me. But I think what I'm learning is that I'm learning more and more to fly. I'm getting further and further each time. And sometimes a good gust of wind comes, and that's a good opportunity. And sometimes it is. And sometimes it's just, I really lucked out on the wind and I fall down to the ground. But luckily, I'm climbing back up that tree. And that's where my friends and family have really been great for me, is that they've encouraged me to climb back up that tree. But you've also got to acknowledge it in yourself, and that you're the one that has to climb back up that tree. No one else can push you up that tree. It's like the horse to water. My friends and family can bring me to that water, but I have to be the one to do the hard yards and do the drinking or climb up the tree. The other one is emotional fuels. Recognizing emotional fuels. I think when I was depressed, especially last year, I knew, for example, something like hiking is something that definitely is an emotional fuel for me, getting out in nature, the open spaces, the greenery. But what may seem silly is that I never really differentiated my emotional fuel. So first of all, is knowing your emotional fuel is what gives you good emotional energy in your life. So whether that be with friends, good food, hiking, being in nature, watching TV, those kind of things. But sometimes you need a different fuel. So sometimes being with friends is really good for me, but it isn't what I need in that moment. And being able to differentiate and fill up on the different ones. So I may have spent a lot of time with friends, as I did last year, but I wasn't being recharged in the other areas of my emotional fuels. And to be honest, I didn't hike as much as I wanted to last year. I didn't play as much social sports as I wanted to last year. And I think that's where I was missing a lot of fuels. Homer's Odyssey, that's something that I thought about a lot during my sessions with my psychologist. And also afterwards is I kind of liken life's experiences. So I struggled a lot with the meaning of life last year. What's the point of going on? What's the point of struggling with this? But I think Homer's Odyssey, the story of Odysseus, where a Greek Roman soldier who goes from Ithaca to Troy, fights a war, and then spends 20 years coming back. If it was just a story of him going to war and back, I think it would be a pretty boring story. But it's the story of the trials and tribulations he went through, and they're not great. They're not the funnest of stories, but it makes it into the beautiful tapestry that is him. And I think if I apply that to my life, if I just had a great job and which moves on to a great family, which moves on to old age, and I'm not explaining this well, but I think it was the idea of having just a linear timeline sounds extremely boring to me. And I like Homer's Odyssey because it's full of experiences. It's full of making the most out of those experiences. It's about living life. It's about learning what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes you have to do it the hard way. And I really like Homer's Odyssey for that. And getting the right help. So the important part in this one for me is kind of knowing when to go to the emergency room when you need to. And I've already touched on this, finding a good psychologist who can refer you on properly if you do need help. And then the last one is when you're helping others. Also, the analogy I have is if you're looking to rescue someone who's drowning, the instinct, especially for me, is to go out to swim to that person and try drag them to shore. But that isn't always going to work because it's hard to pull their weight to shore. But also there's a lot of cases when someone's drowning that it isn't only the person who's drowning who dies, but it's also the rescuer who dies, because what ends up happening is that the rescuer goes out to try save them, but the person who's drowning isn't thinking rationally at all, is in this fight or flight survival mindset. And they may have the best of intentions and be a good person in a normally rational situation, but in that situation, they drag the person down with them because they can't swim. They clamber onto them, they push them down, they try to get a breath of air. And that works for however many minutes until that person, they both get dragged down with them and they're still in the same position they were before. So I liken that to the mental health illness, and that, you may have someone who's drowning in mental health illness, but you've got to be sure to also look after yourself through this, that you don't let it, you don't get dragged down to, it's a really hard one, this, because I know from my situation, I know how hard it is being for my family and my friends to look at me suffering and just feel helpless and just stand by. And I know for me, when I see other friends who are suffering, it's hard to not want to jump in there with them and be there emotionally for them and let them burden you with their emotions. But I think, first of all, it isn't a burden. But I think, second of all, there's a different approach you can take to it. And that's knowing when to talk to the professionals. That's knowing when to look for external help. So if someone's drowning, perhaps looking to see if there's other people around who can help you, whether it's other tools and resources you can throw out to them, whether that be a life ring or any of the other tools that are available. Quickly to start wrapping up now, I'll just say on what helped me. So journaling, as I mentioned, that's helped me quite a bit. Another one is spontaneity, and that listening to my needs and wants has been really important for me. And I think an example of that was, I think last year I did a lot of stuff which present me wasn't really interested in. I think I spent a lot of times with friends so I could appease them. I spent a lot of time at work and study so I could, for future gain, but it wasn't anything I wanted in the moment. And I think that was a pity, because I think there's definitely opportunity there to enjoy the moment and enjoy the work you're doing, or enjoy the friendships you're with. But there was a point last year in November where, in a session with my psychologist, he said, what would you do right now if there wasn't any barriers? And, I said, well, it's impossible, but I would go traveling with a friend. He says, why is it impossible? And I thought about it, and I went home and I thought about it. And actually, sometimes we have a thought or idea that comes to mind, and we push it down because it's, for whatever reason, we think it's impossible. You want to go for a run during the day, but it's impossible because I'm working right now. But the idea here is spontaneity, is how can we accommodate this want in the moment, and trying to accommodate. So if it's you want to run and you're working, perhaps you can bring your shoes to work, or something like that. And for me, in this example in November last year, was I wanted to go traveling, and within a week I said, what, actually I'm going to cancel my plans for December. I'm going to get a visa, I'm going to buy some tickets. And I went to Pakistan for 3 weeks, which is probably the most spontaneous and craziest thing I've done, but was exactly the emotional energy I needed, because I call it coming from my gut. It came straight from my gut. I knew what I wanted. I did it, and it wasn't some revelation. It's not like I'm going to say Pakistan was the experience of my life, but I think, it felt good to actually act on those wants for a change. And then the other thing is sports and outdoors. So getting back with the soccer club I'm now with, boxing gym was good for me, as well as the outdoors, being in open spaces, being in surrounded nature, disconnecting from the electronic world for a change was also nice. Just quickly on the apps I've used, Headspace is a great meditation app I've used. To be honest, meditation hasn't been big for me. I gave it a try every day. I've used Headspace for about 5-6 years. There was a point where, in that time in about 2016, 2017, I used Headspace every day for 3 months. I thought meditation didn't really work for me, but I still recommend Headspace because there's some good SOS meditations, they call them. So 3-minute meditations when you're feeling really struggling in the moment, really overcome with emotion. It kind of grounds you a bit. And then there's also some good sleep meditations on there. What I found really useful over the past 6 months is the Waking Up app by a neuroscientist called Sam Harris. And that is I look at it as a more practical meditation, more applicable in day-to-day life. And that's been a really good meditation app for me. That's been the one I recommend to the friends. And then an app I've been using in the past few months as well is one called Stoic, which is only on the App Store. But that one is one that's marketed as an all-in-one mental health app. So it has space for journaling, but also for other things in there. And such as breathing exercises or meditation or different types of journaling, in that it'll prompt you, what could have gone better today, or what are you grateful for today, or what went well today, or it's a pretty dynamic and all-in-one mental health app, as they call it. But I definitely have appreciated and liked it. And then the last slide for today is just where can we get help? So the first and foremost is life-threatening emergencies. I called 000, or 000 was called for me at a point where it should have been called much earlier, to be honest. And there were times where I was alone, where I could have called 000 and I should have called 000. One that I've used that I find really useful is the mental health emergency response line. And this is a lot of professionals, a lot of psychiatrists, doctors, psychologists. So it's quite a high level of professionals there. And it's not only for those such as myself who are dealing with mental health illness, but also for friends, families, and carers, those who are caring for me, who have cared for me, you can call. Or also if you see someone dealing with a mental health crisis and you need assistance or they need assistance, you can call that number. I've used it before when last year when I was traveling Pakistan, I was not feeling myself. I was wondering, should I change the dosage of my medications? Should I take it at a time earlier than when I was supposed to? I just used Skype to call internationally to Australia. I called the mental health emergency response line, and a psychiatrist just had a conversation with me, just gave me a bit of advice on the medications, and that was really useful. If you do need translation support, I list TIS National's number there for any partners who may need, who may not speak English, or if you're not a native English speaker, there's that help as well. What I found also useful is each year, if you're eligible for Medicare, you can get a mental health care plan, which is 10 sessions rebated by Medicare. I get 10 a year, and it means that when I go to a psychologist, which normally charges $100 something, I now only pay $40. So that's a very accessible plan. It just depends on, if a lot of us are not from Australia, it depends on whether we're eligible for it. The Employee Assistance Program, the EAP with Visagio, I actually used that in January last year. I went to that for about 8 weeks, 4 times in 8 weeks, so every fortnight. On a note that if you are seeking help, I definitely would recommend doing it a bit more often than every fortnight. I do think every fortnight, so it's changeable. If you are someone who goes from the AP, you can choose fortnightly or weekly. I should have, in hindsight, chosen weekly because I currently see my psychologist, and that really helps me do weekly. And then the last one is more personalized resources. So there's a website I found called myservices.org.au, and that's definitely been a useful one, where you can, it's almost a dynamic one where you kind of just answer a few questions. I'm caring for someone, or I'm suffering from whatever mental health illness you may, or whatever you're dealing with at your stage in your life. It asks you a few other questions to get to know you, but gives you a few resources here in Australia or Western Australia that can help you. So one of the questions in the Q&A or in the Pigeonhole was, what signs would you say you can keep an eye out for in people next to you, but not so close, that might indicate they're facing some mental health issues? That's a tough one because for those of you who were on projects with me over the past year, I don't know if I gave any signs or many signs. Some people did pick up on them, but I am extremely surprised that they did. I definitely put out a face. I definitely, I was, I don't know if I put on a face per se, but I tried not to bring that to work. So I think the signs, definitely tiredness for me, definitely, I can speak for myself, and fatigue is one of them. I remember when I was in Belgium, the course I was on was an extremely tough and challenging one with a really high failure rate. And I remember there was someone there, and then most of us were international students. And there's someone there who just, I knew he wasn't doing too well. He was discouraged. And I could tell he was discouraged, the way he talked about the course, the way he talked about the content. There wasn't as much optimism in his voice. There was a lot of fatigue. There was a lot of, I'm tired today. I'm really tired today. So I think the fatigue, it's hard to spot, but I spotted it in him, and I honestly didn't know how to bring it up. That was at a point when I was about 18, 19. And I was struggling with mental health myself, but I didn't know how to bring it up. But I went over to him and I just checked in that he was okay. And I didn't really know how to do much more than that. But what I do know is that I spotted it. And I know he's doing a bit better now. But that's what I saw in him. And I guess that's what I'd say I'm looking out for people next year. But you never know what people are going through, which is hard. There was another question of what drove you to share your experience. Did you always feel this open about sharing? Honestly, so some that I had a few weeks ago, a guy I played tennis with in Zimbabwe, we played quite a bit. I don't know if we weren't necessarily the closest of friends, but he was a good guy. And I really enjoyed playing tennis with him. And he was really popular at school. I lost him when we went to high school, but we disconnected. but he was popular in his year. I knew that much. He was sporty. He was pretty academic. And unfortunately, I think he just wasn't doing. I can't speculate or know what was going through his head, but I think he really struggled at university. Just his marks were dropping and everything at university, and he came back home, and a few weeks later, he took his own life. And for me, that was really, really, it was really hard to take, because I'd been having gone out of the experience of last year, and to hear that from a few weeks ago, and I wish I could have just, in that moment, just, I'm someone who's a physical contact person. I wish I could have just gone up and hugged him and just said, look, let's just walk into the emergency room. Let's just call 000. If we can't walk to the emergency room, let's just anything but this, please. But also, I had another friend who I played soccer with, who was also extremely popular at school, extremely high achieving marks. He was, 99 point something ATAR. So it's not like, it doesn't discriminate to anyone. He had a lot of friends. He was the captain of my soccer team, and I lost him in about 2016. So before my mental health got really bad, and that also really struck me. And there's a few others there who've lost their lives, and I just feel like I can't just keep quiet. In those moments, I wish I can speculate for both those friends. I don't want to speculate, but I do think that in the last few months for them, I think they were in a similar position to I am. If I look at them and I look at what their timeline was and what I've heard from their parents and what their parents have shared, it sounded like they were in very similar situations to me. They felt they're like failures. I know for the friend I lost in 2016, he crashed his car, and that story was all over 7 News and 9 News, and all these media outlets were publishing because he'd done a really stupid thing, and it just got to him, to be honest. And I just wish, that I could have said, and maybe this wouldn't have worked, but I wish I could have just said, let's just check into a hospital. Let's just remove ourselves from the current environment we're in, and let's just take a moment to catch a breather. So that's what, and I think, to be honest, I'm not ashamed of what I've gone through. To be honest, it is who I am. I bring my whole self to everything that I do. And I know that I'm also privileged in a way, or lucky in a way, to not really be ashamed. I know it's not easy for everyone, and I'm lucky that it is a bit easier for me, and I just want to make the most of it, to be honest. And I just want to, hope that one comment here, one line from the whole presentation sticks to someone, and then whenever that becomes handy, it is handy. Just going through the other questions, but I think I'll leave it at that for today. I'll reply in comments to the pigeonhole. Thanks, guys, for coming. I really appreciate it again, and I hope that for those of us who are going through anything, that that there are resources available. I'll post this last slide in the Visage WhatsApp group. I hope that there are people around you, especially at work, and this talk is in the context of work, who want to help you. If there's one place to start, if you are in a place and you don't know where to start, I'd honestly just book in with your GP for a next available appointment. It's probably a bit easier even now with telehealth. Just start there, to be honest. And you may not get the psychologist or psychiatrist that you want, but and you can get referred to a specific one if you need to. My mental health care plans go out to a specific psychologist. I'm happy to recommend my psychologist, who works really well for me. My psychologist has also given me a name of other 3 psychologists who he'd definitely recommend, or he would vouch for. So I'm happy to, if anyone wants those, I'm happy to share those as well. And then from there, there's also the employee assistance program. That's also a great starting point. It's free, it's confidential. confidential in the sense that Visagio had no idea I was going to it. All they were doing was paying the bills, to be honest, so they know how much they have to pay. But I knew that Visagio had no idea I was using it and I was going there. So if I was to recommend two things to start with, would be either the GP or the employee assistance program. And if it gets to a bad point, please do call 000. It's there for a reason, and it is definitely not just for physical emergencies. Thanks, guys.